Welcome to Heart of a Shepherd, and I want to begin with a word of apology or perhaps an explanation. In my work as a pastor and then as the author of Heart of a Shepherd, I tend to have the last thing on my agenda will often be the YouTube videos, and that's just the nature of the work that I'm involved in. So I hope that you'll forgive me for not always being prompt in these YouTube videos. It is certainly not intentional. Well, the title of our devotional is Warning: Compromise Has Far-Reaching Consequences. Now, our scripture reading is 2 Chronicles chapter 18. Now, earlier, the focus of 1 Kings 22 was primarily upon King Ahab, the northern 10 tribes known as Israel. Now, in contrast, as we come to 2 Chronicles 18, it was authored after the Babylonian captivity. Many believe it was perhaps authored by Ezra, one of the leaders that returned to Jerusalem. Well, this particular chapter does now focus upon, because it was recorded after the Babylonian captivity, the focus tends to be more on King Jehoshaphat and the kingdom of Judah, which, by the way, remember, consisted of Judah and Benjamin. Of course, anytime we're mentioning Israel after the time of Rehoboam, it, of course, is always referring to the 10 northern tribes. And so the focus of our devotional then is 2 Chronicles 18. Now, as a nation, Judah had enjoyed God's blessings during the reign of Jehoshaphat. The king had, we read in chapter 18 and verse 1, riches and honor in abundance. Unfortunately, Jehoshaphat joined affinity with Ahab, the king of Israel, and his son Jehoram married one of Ahab's daughters. Now, 3 years later, Jehoshaphat decided to travel to visit Ahab in Samaria, the capital city of Israel. Well, after a lavish banquet, Ahab proposed that Judah would support Israel in an attack on Ramoth-Gilead. Now, that Ramoth-Gilead was a Levite city of refuge. However, at that time, it was occupied by Syria. Well, Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, was willing to go to war with Ahab and Israel. After all, they were family by marriage, chapter 18 and verse 3. And yet, Jehoshaphat was a spiritually minded enough king that he requested that they seek the word of the Lord for his will, that is, the Lord's guidance, in chapter 18 and verse 4. And so Ahab obliged the king of Judah. The king of Israel gathered together prophets, 400 men. Now, quite an impressive group. And he said unto these 400 prophets, shall we go to Ramoth-Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? Well, Ahab's 400 chosen prophets, eager to please the king, answered his inquiry, and they said, go up, for God's will deliver it into the king's hand, it being Ramoth-Gilead. Well, knowing the character of true prophets of the Lord was to speak independently, and these all spoke in unison without a fear of consequences, Jehoshaphat was concerned that Ahab's prophets had all spoken with one voice. And therefore, the king of Judah asked Ahab, is there not here a prophet of the Lord besides, that we might inquire of him? Chapter 18 and verse 6. Well, Ahab admitted there was another prophet, but he confessed concerning the prophet Micaiah, or some would say Micaiah, I hate him, for he never prophesied good unto me, but always evil. Nevertheless, Micaiah, whom we met in an earlier Bible study in 1 Kings 22, was commanded to come before the kings of Israel and Judah. Well, when the prophet came, the wise prophet delivered a message to Ahab, the one that he desired. And still, he did not attribute his words to the Lord. While Ahab, though wicked, realized that the prophet failed to speak prophetically, and therefore he challenged him. Verse 15, how many times shall I adjure thee that thou say nothing but the truth to me in the name of the Lord? Well, the prophet then spoke of a vision of the heavenly council that had gathered around the throne of God. In the vision, Israel was, quote, scattered as sheep that have no shepherd, verse 16. Now, you and I understanding that in the Bible, the king of Israel was identified as a shepherd of the people. The prophecy left no doubt to Ahab that it was a foretelling of his death. So the Lord's prophet described how God requested that a messenger would go to Ahab and entice him to go to battle at Ramoth Gilead, where he would be slain. When the vision, the Spirit then went out from the Lord and put a lying spirit in the mouth of all, that is, of all of Ahab's prophets. And therefore, they spoke with unison. Why? Because of an evil spirit. Well, Micaiah declared, behold, verse 22, the Lord hath put a lying spirit in the mouth of thy prophets, and the Lord hath spoken evil against thee, Ahab. Well, exposed as a lying prophet, we read that Zedekiah, a false prophet of Ahab, came near and he smote Micaiah upon the cheek. Well, here it is death foretold. Ahab was angry, and he demanded that the prophet be imprisoned with bread and water until he returned from battle. Verse 25 and 26. Well, emboldened and confident, God's prophet warned the king, if thou certainly return in peace, then hath not the Lord spoken by me. And he said, verse 27, hearken all ye people. In other words, the words that the prophet stated in this sense was to the people. If I'm wrong, Ahab will return. If I'm right, Ahab will die. Well, despite the prophet's warning, Jehoshaphat went to war with the king of Israel, Ahab, and went into battle against the king of Syria. Now, I guess Ahab taking his own precaution lest he be discovered as the king, we read in verse 29 how he disguised himself that he might not be recognized and targeted by the Syrian soldiers. And yet, in the providence of God, an arrow from a nameless soldier struck Ahab, the king of Israel, and mortally wounded him. Well, verse 34. Thus was the prophecy of Elijah fulfilled, for as the sun was setting that day, Ahab, the king of Israel, died. And we read that one washed the chariot in the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood, even as Elijah had prophesied, and they washed his armor, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake. That was 1 Kings chapter 21. Well, closing thought for you today. Though the consequences of Jehoshaphat's alliance with Israel were not immediately evident, his compromise with Ahab through the marriage of his son to the king's daughter, the wicked king Ahab, introduced great wickedness in Judah and nearly terminated David's royal lineage. Well, a personal observation. The king of Judah aligned himself with the wicked king of Israel because of his son's marriage to Ahab's daughter. Now, the result of that compromised alliance ultimately invited God's judgment. And I will confess to you, I have witnessed that same pattern in the past 2 decades in my small circle of conservative churches, schools, and Bible colleges. I've seen pastors, evangelists, teachers, and board members of institutions who have followed the sin of Jehoshaphat. And by that I mean they've accommodated the sins of their children in their ministry, thereby compromising their ministries, whether it's a church, a Bible college, a university, or some other institution. To accommodate their sins, they began to soft pedal sin. The sacrifice, of course, is God's blessings and power. Well, some reading this Bible study have observed, and you even have supported, if not, you're still supporting men and Bible institutions that have closed or are failing. Now, I have found, almost without exception, that the compromises of leaders and their families precipitated the failures of their ministries. And so I close with a warning. When spiritual leaders accommodate their children's sins and compromises, they sacrifice their testimonies and the ministries and institutions they lead. Look around. Don't be a part of compromise, for if you do so, you will sacrifice not only God's blessings, but God's best for you, and if you're a leader, for those whom you pastor or minister. Well, thank you for being a part of Heart of the Shepherd. Again, apology. This is coming late to you, but it is coming from the heart of the shepherd. God bless you, and bye-bye.